Hello and welcome to the Kidney Ally Nutrition Podcast, the one and only podcast where we tackle the hardest questions around what constitutes a good, healthy kidney diet. Whether you're a patient, a carer, a nephrologist, or a dietitian, I'm sure you'll learn something new today about what constitutes a good, healthy kidney diet. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of our Kidney Nutrition Podcast for Kidney Ally. I'm co-founder Carl Juresic, transplant patient.
And I'm Ruth Kander, renal dietitian in London. Looking forward to having a chat with you today.
Yes, and today's one is all about dairy, which in our Facebook group has become really popular. A lot of people asking all the time questions about dairy. And, you know, dairy in itself is huge as a category. There's things like butter, things like cheese, things like yogurt, things like milk, things like cream, all of these things that obviously come from animals, particularly cows, I assume. That's like kind of where all dairy comes from. Yeah, probably just starting there kind of with dairy as a category, like it covers a lot of food and it pretty much is in a lot of food as well. So the idea of not eating dairy is really hard to do for someone if they get told as a patient. And more annoyingly so, what we see more and more in the group is they're incorrectly told just to stop dairy because they're being diagnosed with any of the stages. And there's a pretty high chance that that's not needed. And I think like that's probably would be a nice place to start is like, what is the correlation at all, if there is any, between dairy and why doctors seem to be telling patients or why people think they don't need dairy?
So the only thing I can think of, because to be honest, I hadn't really come across it until our group hadn't seen it particularly. So the only thing I can think of is that doctors think that people should follow a pure 100% plant-based diet to help with their kidneys, although again, that's something that is not proven 100%. But we have seen, I mean, it's broadened my horizons massively, seeing what people are saying about when they convert to a plant-based diet, how much it improves their kidney function. But I'm very conscious, this is all very anecdotal. I'm not saying that anyone's lying, but it's very anecdotal. There's no hardcore science behind it all. But I do think there is something to be said for reducing protein and helping improve kidney function. And I actually don't think we know what that mechanism is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that if people have got any raised potassium, which is more likely than a raised phosphate, because a raised phosphate is much later, it's more CKD stage 5, you get a raised phosphate in dialysis. Possibly they're saying for that reason as well, but otherwise I'm not really sure why they're saying. Dairy product is a very big sort of source of calcium, and calcium is really essential for bone health. And although bone metabolism is altered in chronic kidney disease, in the earlier stages, you still need it. So I'm not quite sure where doctors are coming from. And to be fair, and I think doctors are great and they know their job really well, they don't have any nutrition training at the end of the day. So please just remember that when you're talking to a doctor and they're telling you all these lovely things, they don't have nutrition training and they don't have experience of advising and recommending and seeing all that information that's in the literature as well. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah, that's kind of the main thing that people say when they join the group or they have a question about dairy is my doctor, or I've read that I should stop all meat, all dairy, all protein, and that's not good, because then if you don't have any protein at all at a minimum level, that's going to also get you sick as well, from previous podcasts we've been on.
Yeah.
And that feels like, is that the area of dairy that doctors must be thinking is the thing that could be damaging, is if there's too much protein? Is that probably the main thing that they're looking at yeah.
I'm assuming it's the protein and potassium, the combination of the two. That's what I'm assuming. I don't know. I really, really can't get my head around who who've been told. I have to say, anyone I've seen personally in the UK hasn't been told that.
Yeah.
But they might have picked it up from somewhere else, or they might have been to another country or been on holiday and they've been to a doctor in another country and been told that, but not necessarily in the UK, no one I've seen. But again, you know, and also sometimes people just talk to each other. They say, oh, do you know what? I think it's not good to have dairy. Let's not eat dairy, or that kind of thing. And then they kind of have it in their head that they're not going to have. So I think it spirals like that. But I think that it shouldn't be like that, and people can eat, but there's no rules or guidance that says if you have CKD you should avoid dairy. That's not true.
So there's definitely no science or no correlation between eating dairy and your kidneys getting worse. That's kind of the kind of gist we've got of this at the moment. And then, but there clearly is, like, maybe at certain stages of kidney disease where you're on a very particular diet that you might want to look at reducing if you're having lots of milk every day or lots of eggs every day or lots of, you know, these classic dairy things. That's when you'd want to look at your dairy intake and kind of start reducing it if you're eating a lot of it, because a lot of it is quite healthy in regards to your body. I think also there might be something around like the broader narrative in culture around dairy, because there is the ethical implications, and there's been a lot of big brands that have kind of come out recently, such as Oatly, and which is an oat-based drink that's gone really popular. And then obviously there's been Netflix documentaries about the effects of cows and how they affect the ecosystem in greenhouse gases and that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing is maybe that's affecting the narrative around why dairy looks bad. But overall, if you look at the breakdown of what's inside milk or inside eggs, it's generally quite healthy, high in protein, and very natural. Is that yeah?
It is. The only thing I would say, sorry, I forgot to say before, but I would say now, is that cheese is really high in salt. Cheese is very, very salty. So that's possibly, but I wouldn't say don't have dairy just because of cheese is salty. So I would say, you know, dairy is fine, but be careful with things like cheddar. They're very salty foods. They contain a very, very high level of salt. Just have them in moderation and in small quantities.
So maybe that's a really good segue to go into like maybe each of the big areas of dairy, because it's quite a big area and it's like kind of there's different segues. So we start on cheese. That's something that obviously you make cheese with milk and then you add things to it and it kind of ferments or whatever it is over time, and you get different types. And is there particular types of cheeses that are worse than others? I'm probably gonna do a whole podcast on cheeses, but like in regards to just the big ones to be weary of, is there ones that if you're a particular transplant patient or a kidney patient that's early stage or late stage, are there ones that are worse than others overall?
So in terms of cheeses for transplant patients, so you want to avoid any blue vein cheeses. So there's like the blue vein cheese and the Roquefort cheese, and also any mold ripened cheese like Brie and Camembert you want to avoid, only just because you don't want to get any infection, and unpasteurized cheese you want to avoid.
So is that because like being a transplant patient and knowing that I have probably eaten that type of cheese before, is the worry there, it's not more about the food content, but the chance of, like I said, getting an infection from a mold? So if you were to like a particular blue cheese or a blue vein cheese, it's kind of making sure that it's from a really safe source and like not like a really, you know, a classic dodgy cheese shop that's on like the local one. It's more like something in the supermarket or something.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it says if you look on NHS choices actually under cheese and dairy, it does say if you're immunosuppressed, you should avoid these cheeses. But like a lot of these things that we say to transplant patients or immunosuppressed patients, we just say it as a proportion. So I always feel that if someone, you know, it's something they have regularly and they've never had an infection, then fine, just make sure that you have it, like you said, from a reliable source and a very, you know, and it's stored properly and all that, then that's fine.
Yeah, I think
But I
I'm
think that, the
living
rules are,
proof that it's fine because I think I
yeah,
the thing is I've slowed it down as well because like I've realized with cheese how high fat and high salt it is. I think that for me is the biggest thing that I look at now as opposed to the the blue thing. But I probably will. I don't eat it all the time. It's like once in a blue moon when it's on a cheese board. But it's just kind of checking on where it is and where it's come from type thing.
mm. So yeah, so I think just be careful with it, and just um, don't have too often. And again, like you say, a reliable source. In terms of CKD, so I think that I would just cut down on hard cheeses. Softer cheeses and mozzarella seem to be lower in salt than, let's say, cheddar. So that's better. It's it's not low salt, but it is lower. It's probably half the amount of salt that cheddar has. And I think the salt is in there really just to preserve the cheese and prevent it from going moldy, and to give it a bit of flavor. So it is something that's actually required. I think just use a small quantity.
So just check it out on the side of the label in like the salt sodium content and making sure that it's low in grams or ounces
Yeah,
versus high amounts.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, so that's that would be the main reason why I would think that maybe doctors would say, or people would say, avoid dairy. But yogurt is fine and milk is fine. And I've had a number of people say to me, "Oh, I'm really missing milk in my tea. I've switched to rice milk or almond milk, and I really don't like it. Do I really need to do that?" And they don't need to do that. So again,
A good segue is on the big one that kind of a lot of people have all the time, which is milk. My misconception around milk. I remember, and again, the media and brands obviously help push that narrative as well around particular milks and what's healthy and what's not healthy. I think they're all the same, and it's just like looking at the content of what's inside. Um, Obviously, consciously, people might not want to have milk because of the environmental reasons, which is totally fair enough. But in regards to your body and what you're eating, there's very little differences. One thing I have seen quite a lot in recipes, which will probably be adding on to our kidney ally recipes, is experimenting a lot with rice milk. Do you know why that's so prevalent in kidney friendly recipes?
I don't know. I looked at nutritional analysis of the plant milks and compared them with dairy milk, and they were lower in potassium and phosphate, except for coconut was really high. Coconut milk was really high potassium, and I wouldn't encourage that. And it's also quite high saturated fat, so I wouldn't encourage that. But I guess because it's quite low in, rice is very low potassium phosphate, so I guess that's why. But I don't know. I'm not, to be honest, hands up, not familiar with the plant milks. But my biggest take-home message about plant milk, if you're going to swap to plant milk, that's really fine, but make sure it's fortified with calcium, with calcium, and that it has a good 120 milligrams of calcium per 100 mils of milk. Because if you don't make sure you have the fortified versions, then you are at risk of having too low a calcium intake and then causing other problems to your bones as well. So they'll get even weaker.
If someone was to get calcium, where would be a good source? If ethically they'd say gone to a plant-based milk, or the one they like doesn't have high calcium, is there another place you can get calcium on a daily basis?
So, some green leafy vegetables have got calcium in them. Some nuts and seeds, actually dried apricots and dried figs have got some calcium in them, but they're not the best source if you're on a low potassium diet. So just see where you are in terms of potassium. Also, fish with edible bones are extremely high in calcium, and part of the whole healthy heart kind of messages. So things like sardines, whitebait, any fish with tiny edible bones, they're going to be very high calcium. So they're an amazing source. Tofu actually is a good source of calcium as well. Some of them have got very high calcium levels, like 250 milligrams per 100 grams of tofu, which is a quarter of your requirements a day. So that's fantastic too. But I do wonder about absorption of calcium from sources. I'm under the impression it's not as well absorbed as calcium from dairy products. So just be mindful of that and just make sure that you're having extra, if you like. But I've seen a lot of on all the vegan websites and the plant-based eating websites, there's always a section on calcium, and there's always some good ideas about how to incorporate. But in essence, green leafy vegetables, tofu, oranges, some nuts and seeds, and figs and apricots have got calcium in them.
It feels like, I imagine that someone that is ethically choosing to not to have milk would probably be more likely to have tofu, which is good because you've got a big balance there of other areas of calcium to kind of get that from. I do find that the oat milk ones, like in cafes, are quite prominent at the moment. You have a lot of oat milk, and I've kind of switched. I found actually that when there was a lot of saturated fat in oat milk that I wasn't aware of before kind of looking into it in more details. So again, it's a watch out as well with these other alternative milks, that there's a lot of high saturated fat in other areas. So it's just a watch out, because they need to add the flavor in there as well with the sugars. So it's just like that classic thing with water versus, colored drinks. You're always just going to have that added stuff in it. Whereas the dairy stuff has just the natural, from the animals. So that's really interesting on milk. And then in regards to another big area of dairy is butter, which would include a lot of milk, I'm guessing. I'm not even sure how the hell you make butter, but I think that the watch out with butter, correct me if I'm wrong, is looking for ones that are more like unsalted or like low salt butter, because probably just really fattening, I'm guessing, butter. And is there high levels of potassium and phosphorus in butter?
Not really, because it's all kind of taken out in the processing. The thing with butter is that it's more the saturated fat I would be worried about. And if someone has got sort of cholesterol, or any kidney patient, to be honest, is high risk of heart disease than anyone in the general population. So you always should be more careful, always thinking about your heart health and being more careful. If you're on a statin, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but you're less likely to get high cholesterol. But what I would say is don't have tons of butter, have it really in moderation, maybe mix it up with an olive oil type spread. Now there's a bit of a issue with the whole margarine and the palm oil, because that's, not so healthy either. But then I was reading that actually it's not as unhealthy as they thought it was. And then I got completely confused, and I was like, well, what is going on here? Either it is or it isn't. So what I do say, so what I have decided in the last few years is that if you want to have a bit of butter, have a bit of butter. Sure, there's no chemicals in it if you're CKD. But also what I think is also a good one to have is olive oil spreads. So that kind of thing. Now, a lot of people say to me they don't like it. It tastes horrible. I haven't tried it, so I don't know. But I don't really eat any margarine or butter. I don't like butter. So, try that if you like it. The other thing, which is also quite good, but I'm very conscious that it's quite a costly product and there isn't 100% proof that it's useful, is these plant stanol spreads. So they are, it's called Flora-Proactiv or Benecol in the UK, and they are made from the tree bark, and they've got chemicals in them called plant stanols, and they have been shown as part of a healthy eating diet to be useful to help manage cholesterol levels. Now, I don't have any association to any companies whatsoever, but that's what we have in the UK. I do say to people, if people are not on statins or they can't tolerate statins, I do tell people to use those products, because it's a bit of a safety net, and that can be helpful for people. And I have seen people's cholesterol go down or stabilize on those products without having statins. So I think they're useful. And the other thing to remember is that margarine, butter, all fats are 9 calories per gram. Okay, so they're all the same. So a margarine and a butter would be the same calories. It's just a type of fat that's different and is better or less better for your heart.
Yeah, I think the butter or the spreadable category is very interesting, because there's a lot of different marketing to kind of, in the 90s, there was that I can't believe it's not butter brand in the US. I was living in Australia, made it all the way to Australia. In the UK, I think Lurpak is quite popular as a very natural butter, and it's got lots of different types with the unsalted variety as well. But I think the main thing is for people listening around butter, it's having a good look at what you're using, and whatever you're using it in moderation, making sure that it's probably not related to your kidney, but it's your cholesterol and the fat levels you're going to kind of be taking in.
Absolutely, 100%.
And then, interestingly enough, I put on another area of dairy is yogurt, which again is kind of, culturally, I think, associated with being very healthy. Again, a lot of marketing goes involved in manipulating everyone's minds in what is healthy. But I did post a recipe up on our group this week around with Greek yogurt, and my understanding, and I could be wrong, my understanding Greek yogurt was it's more natural, so it has lots less sugars, and but it's got high protein, so it is a bit healthier than a different type of yogurt. But people are posting kidney patients can't eat yogurt. I'm like, you can eat yogurt as long as you're not on a low potassium diet. It's probably going to be fine. Is that the consensus?
So yeah, I think even on low potassium diet, you can probably have some. The whole yogurt arena is just a minefield, actually, and there's so many different varieties now, so many different, high fat, low sugar, high sugar. It's just a bit of a minefield. So my general rules for yogurt is, if you are trying to lose weight or you're diabetic, choose yogurt that is less than 100 calories a pot and as low to 5 grams of sugar per pot as you possibly can, because 5 grams of sugar is going to be 1 teaspoonful of sugar. You don't really want more than that in one little pot of yogurt if you're diabetic or trying to lose weight. So that is like my general rule for weight management and diabetes in terms of yogurts. I actually have some dialysis patients who I'm desperate to get the protein into them. So I have been recommending the 20-gram protein yogurt pots to them and saying, please go and buy them. They'll be brilliant. They're really helpful. So it's about trying to have ones with not too many ingredients, not too much sugar and fat. And, there's the general guidelines and the color coding. In the UK, we've got sort of often color coding on labels that will tell you if it's red or amber in terms of fats and sugar. So that's quite good guidance. But I think if it's around 5 grams a pot, less than 100 calories a pot, that's what you're going to go for. Now, yogurt is a really good source of calcium and a really good way of getting your calcium in. And I think it's a great breakfast or dessert product. So at breakfast, you could have it with granola or with fruit or with a bit of cereal if you don't want to have milk. And then you could have it as a dessert, after meal. It is higher potassium than maybe just having, I don't know, a cream actually is not so high potassium, but yogurt is a bit higher. But again, I think it's a natural product, and I think it can be very good for you. So just watch out what you're buying, look at what you're buying, and look at what you're having, and don't have 3 yogurts a day. 1 a day, I think is perfect.
Yeah, and I think a way, when the person made the comment, like, I can't eat yogurt, I kind of try and look at it like almost like you have a fresh glass every day, and watch your levels of sodium, potassium, phosphorus if you're on a low potassium and low phosphorus diet. It feels like with dairy, it's much more of a nutritional topic than a kidney topic, because really the only things that kidney patients need to look at is like maybe when they're eating cheese, things with high salt, or maybe things, if you're a transplant patient, really moldy cheeses that might give you an infection. But other than that, if you're just having a balanced diet, you're really watching the fat content of your butter or your milks or cheeses. That's really feels like the worry around dairy is just making sure you're not having too much of it in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Maybe the last area might be around, and it's a bit of a knotty area. It's around lactose intolerance. So it's the interesting thing on that is actually I worked with a brand called Lacto Free for a year, and they're quite big in Europe because they're a lactose-free drink. And it's very interesting because, again, this doesn't really correlate too much to kidney patients, is if people have an issue themselves where their body can't digest lactose. Is that that's how that works? If your body just chemically can't digest it in a way and coughs it up? Is that how that works?
So in your gut, you've got in your small intestine, so you've got your stomach, and then your small intestine, and then your large intestine. And in your small intestine, you've got these microvilli, which is an area for absorption of food absorption. And on those villi, you've got lactase enzymes. So if you've had any damage to your gut, so infection or anything really, or you don't really have much dairy, sometimes it just kind of disappears and you don't have it. And therefore people can become lactose intolerant. And lactose intolerance is mainly classified by severe wind, bloating, diarrhea following eating milk or yogurt or soft cheese. So hard cheese as such doesn't have any lactose. So to be honest, all these lactose-free hard cheeses is a bit of a nonsense because regular cheddar doesn't have any lactose in it particularly. So just be careful of that. But I think that a lot of people are gut sensitive, and just because you've got kidney problems doesn't mean you're going to be gut sensitive. So people who are lactose free, who want to follow lactose free or feel that that's beneficial for them, because a lot of it in the UK is self-diagnosis, because to diagnose lactose intolerance you need to have a hydrogen breath test, where you drink a solution, a lactose milk solution, and then you blow in and they measure the hydrogen on your breath, and as above a certain threshold, then that you're classified as lactose intolerant, and you need referral to gastroenterology. And it's a process. As we all know, the NHS is a great system when you're very sick, but for things like this it takes a very long time to get it. So people self-diagnose and self-medicate. So my concern always is, if people are going to go lactose free, they're going to miss out on calcium. So make sure that you're following it properly and that you know what you're doing. And there are lactose-free products around, and those lactose-free products have got the same calcium as regular milk. The companies just removed the lactose, and those are probably the best ones to have, or the plant-based ones that are fortified with calcium.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing, because I did a lot of research when working on this particular brand, and I found that actually a majority of people just buy it because, again, it's the consensus in culture around, oh, it's healthier for me.
Yeah.
And I think I get a bit of a tummy ache when I have milk, when you probably are fine. And so it's being, to that point, being careful about the calcium intake. I think one that I fell for early on when it became more of a trend was gluten-free. I remember my wife telling me, oh, can you get the gluten-free pasta? Because I just thought it was healthier, because for some reason in my head, I'm like, sounds healthier. And then she's like, you're an idiot. You need to, no, it's fine. And sometimes you read it on menus and stuff, this one's gluten-free, so it's obviously healthier. So I think that's is similar to the lactose-free and the free from. Just get medically diagnosed, or otherwise make sure if you do eat that thing because you like the taste, that you're getting whatever it's missing from other areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the key thing. But for kidney patients overall, there's no strong overlap here between worrying about a transplanted kidney or an early stage diagnosis. It's just keeping a healthy, balanced diet.
Exactly. Absolutely, 100%. And yeah, don't fall for the gluten-free thing. That's healthier. Please, please, please. It's really not. It's not, unless you're celiac and then you really need it, or you really got severe wheat intolerance or wheat allergy. Don't fall for it.
Exactly. So I think that's all the questions I had from like a patient point of view. But did you have anything to add around dairy and misconceptions and just those alerts for patients? Because I know a lot of people in our group asked about it, so we're posting this a lot through the group to those threads.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the notes I made. So just if you decide to go plant-based, like I've said, do check that it's calcium fortified, whatever plant-based product you choose. Coconut is okay, but it is higher in saturated fat. It is higher in potassium. Coconut yogurts don't have any protein. Sorry, they do have some protein. They do have protein, but they're high potassium, so just watch out. It's the vegan cheese, actually. The vegan cheese has no protein in it. it's fat and salt. So just be careful with that. If you're going to really go the whole hog, just have really tiny amounts, or just have regular cheese in tiny amounts, probably actually a bit better. Watch out for bone health. Don't have raw milks or raw cheeses, because again, you don't want to get, even if you're not a transplant patient, you don't want to get any foodborne related illnesses, and that can be a
What would a
risk.
raw milk? What would a raw milk example be?
I've seen kind of advertised, they think it's really good because it's not been pasteurized. And pasteurization is just heat treatment to kill off any bacteria. So just be careful if you think you're being clever and you're going, I don't know, having a holiday on a farm or somewhere very, rural. Just be careful that you're not having anything that's not pasteurized, because it's not a clever thing to do. Whereas you might think it is because it's so natural, and how can it affect me? It actually can. So just be careful of that. And I think that's it really. I think that's all to say about milk and dairy and yogurt and cheese. But please, you don't need to avoid it. If you really, missing your milk in your tea, you don't need to. You don't need to. And whoever's told you to avoid it is sorry, but you're wrong.
Yeah. And I think also when it's such a small amount of milk, it's a few drops as well. So even if it was restrictive, it's a few drops. It's not going to hurt you
Exactly.
in the long term. I think the other thing I've seen a lot in supermarkets now, because there's a huge plant-based growth, probably have a whole other episode on plant-based food, but just is the watch out in dairy, in, to your point, the high sodium, because usually plant-based alternatives for cheese, for example, which is probably the area of dairy, is going to have huge amounts of salt to get the flavor in there. So yeah, just always look at the sodium content on products. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ruth, as always. And we'll be posting this up in the group. Make sure to check out our website, kidneyally.com. By the time this goes out, hopefully it's live. And drop us an email, carl@kidneyally.com, or go into our Facebook group to ask us any questions you have, or about other podcasts and everything else. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much.
Hi.